Hello students, lesson on defining economic, social and physical vulnerability encompassing exposure and sensitivity. The main objective of today's lesson are to explain different types of vulnerability and also to explain the reason behind different types of vulnerability. And the next objective of the lesson is to explain the causes and the determinants of various types of vulnerability. So let us start the discussion. The first question which might be coming in your mind is, what is the word vulnerable? The word vulnerable, which originates from the verb to hurt, has been used in many different ways to talk about how social and natural systems respond to changes. The idea of vulnerability shows how catastrophes may have many different effects by looking at the web of social ties that generate situations that, when they mix with natural forces, can have terrible results. Students, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the third assessment report from 2001, described that vulnerability is the degree to which a system is susceptible or unable to cope with the adverse effect of climate change, including climate variability and other extreme of nature. Vulnerability is how probable it is that a system or group of people will be hurt by climatic risk. There are three main parts that make it work. The first is exposure. Exposure is how much people or things are in danger. For example, coastal communities that are in danger of rising sea level. The second is sensitivity, is how much a system is influenced, for example, crops that are sensitive to variations in temperature. And the third is the adaptive capacity. Adaptive capacity means able to deal with change or get better, for example, having access to irrigation, insurance or early warning systems. This paradigm helps us figure out why certain countries or groups are more likely to be in danger than others. The notion of vulnerability is one of the key ideas in the study of disaster, climate change, development inequalities, and human-environment interactions. It describes how some individual locations or structures are more affected by hazards like flood, drought, earthquake, cyclone, pandemics, or economic shocks in comparison to the rest. Vulnerability does not merely exist as having hazards, but it is closely tied to social systems, economic systems, physical landscapes, and political systems. In a nutshell, I can say vulnerability is nowadays mostly perceived as a multidimensional concept of exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity, used in the modern science related to disaster risk, mitigation and climate change. There are three fundamental dimensions of vulnerability that are the subject of this lecture. The first is physical vulnerability, second is economic vulnerability, and the third is social vulnerability. All three of these dimensions are interacting with exposure. And sensitivity means how much they are affected and when they are put into a risk. The need to understand these types of vulnerability is to develop inclusive policies of development, disaster risk reduction, climate adaptation, and sustainable urban and rural systems. So let me start with explaining to you the physical vulnerability. What is the meaning of physical vulnerability? Physical vulnerability is the ability of physical structure, infrastructure, and human settlements to be damaged or destroyed in case they are subjected to hazards. It is mainly interested in the location in which the people reside, the way buildings and infrastructure are built, and the nature of the environment of a place. Physical vulnerability addresses such questions. For instance, are individuals residing in flood-prone regions or earthquake-prone regions? Do houses have materials that are resistant to disaster? Does it have an adequate infrastructure to withstand extreme events? The cause of physical vulnerability is not always an accident, but it is usually a result of bad planning, fast urbanization, slums, environmental destruction, and weak regulations. Now, let me explain to you the physical vulnerability and exposure. As I mentioned that exposure is condition of human presence, assets and infrastructure in region that are prone to hazards. So exposure is automatically high and this leads to physical vulnerability. Examples of exposure are population along the coast who would be affected by cyclones and storm surges, riverbank settlements that are subject to floods, hill slope habitats that are open to landslides, or even a slum in the cities that are close to drain, garbage, heaps or industries. The exposure is more extreme in most developing countries due to lack of proper assessment by the economically weaker group who are compelled to occupy unsafe and marginal lands like floodplains, reclaimed wetlands or unreliable slopes. Now let me explain to you the concept of sensitiveness in relation to the physical vulnerability. Sensitivity is measure of the damage occurrence of a hazard. Although the exposure of two locations may be equal, it can vary with as far as quality of construction like mud houses versus reinforced concrete is concerned. The second is the age of infrastructure. The third is the drainage system maintenance. The fourth is the protective structures such as embankment or sea walls. These are available. To illustrate it further, I will say that a properly constructed structure can withstand an earthquake with minimum damages, but the poorly constructed ones will fall all at once. Therefore, sensitivity defines the intensity of physical loss. Now, let me explain to you the determinants of physical vulnerability. Students, the physical vulnerability is determined by such factors. The first is location in the area of hazard zone. Second is construction material, temporary and permanent buildings. The third is quality of infrastructure such as road, bridges, power lines and drains. The fourth is planning of land use, zoning laws and regulations related to it. And the fifth one is the environmental factors such as deforestation, destruction of wetlands, soil erosion, etc. The physical vulnerability is also quite common in informal settlements where legal status and their investment are less apparent. Now the question is, what are the implications of physical vulnerability? Great physical vulnerability leads to loss of life and injuries, razing of houses and social infrastructure, basic services such as water, electricity, transport disruption, long recovery period. A physical vulnerability reduction needs risk-sensitive land use planning, robust infrastructure and implementation of building codes.